shit. That's what I'm talking about. Wait.
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Advancement Amplified, AI for IA, a special 5-part pulse check series brought to you by Enrollify. I'm Dan Giroux, a higher education marketing and communications leader focused on elevating the strategic impact of advancement. Advancement is at a pivotal moment, with shifting donor expectations, alumni engagement challenges, financial pressures, and the demand to do more with less. AI has emerged a transformative force. It offers unprecedented opportunity to reshape and amplify how teams connect, strategize, and deliver results. In this series, we'll explore how AI can be integrated without overwhelming staff, balancing efficiency with authentic human connections, and unlocking strategic innovations for the future. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to Advancement Amplified, AI for IA. So far in this series, we've explored AI's growing role in advancement, from its broad adoption to practical marketing communication applications and fundraising. But today we're turning our focus to the heart of every institution, teams that make it all happen. AI is reshaping how advancement teams work, changing roles, skill sets, and team dynamics in ways we're still figuring out. But with the transformation comes critical questions. How do we ensure AI is an enabler, not a replacement? How do we prepare our teams for continuous evolution without overwhelming them? And where should institutions invest to get the most out of AI? To help us unpack these topics, I'm thrilled to welcome Andrew Gossen, Executive Director of Communications, Marketing, and Participation at Cornell University. Andrew has been at the forefront of integrating digital tools into advancement work and has a unique perspective on where AI fits into the evolving landscape of our teams. Andrew, thanks for joining us. Let's start with some background. Tell us a bit about your role at Cornell and how your team is structured to support digital innovation.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for inviting me to join the podcast. I'm excited about this. So I've been at Cornell since 2010. I was brought in with a specific mandate to explore ways that we could take advantage of emerging technologies to further our advancement goals, initially in alumni engagement. And then as time ran on, I got more involved with the fundraising side of things as well. I was focused primarily on social media. Obviously, that was sort of the hot moment. But over time, like I said, I've gotten more involved with the fundraising side of things, moving from crowdfunding into giving days, into social media ambassador platforms. And then by 2018 or 2019, we were really thinking much more holistically about the entire digital ecosystem and how we can use digital tools to make it easier for people to connect with each other and to do the things that we ask them to do. So beginning to focus on AI has been a natural evolution of that mandate to focus on emerging technologies and what it can do for advancement. In terms of the team structure, I started off with a very small and nimble and happy team of 3 people working exclusively on social media. And over time, that team has grown to the point that as of a reorg in 2020, I now lead all of the communications and marketing and participation level giving efforts at Cornell and have a team of 29 staff under me working to make all of this happen.
You certainly experienced a lot of growth and transition of roles and responsibilities over that time. I think we could both agree that AI adoption and advancement is still very much early on in its development, with different institutions moving at different speeds. How did it first emerge as a priority for your team, and how has that approach started to evolve since then?
We'd actually had our eye on AI since around 2018. That was the year this was back when Case District 2 still had these venture grants to enable people to apply for funds to put on professional development opportunities that weren't available elsewhere in the Case training ecosystem. And we actually developed and put on an AI and advancement conference back in 2018 when this was all just barely light on the horizon. I think one of the biggest differences between then and now is that back then, the conversation was very abstract and a lot of people were trying to wrap their heads around what the basic functionality is that you might see with AI tools and AI systems. And of course, with the release of ChatGPT and the dawn of generative AI, lots of people now have had a chance to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty and try this stuff out. The reason that adoption is proceeding at a slower and sort of stop and go place is that in contrast to past emerging technologies like smartphones and social media, I think it's less immediately clear how these tools are going to change the work that we do. It's clear that they will in some way, shape, or form, right? There's enough there now to know that this is not a flash in the pan the way past AI booms in the 80s and 90s were. But at the same time, you hear lots of people talking about the potential of AI. You hear much less about concrete examples of how the game has changed because of the deployment of AI. And I think a moment from the past that can teach us a little bit something about when we've crossed that sort of conceptual and operational hurdle, and it's a real thing that's changing things, is Columbia and Columbia Giving Day back in 2012. And up until that point, I remember a lot of the conversations about the importance of digital was very much like the conversations about AI are now, and that it's here, it's interesting, it's got a lot of potential. But then Columbia Giving Day happened and they raised $6 million in 24 hours. And once you're talking millions of dollars, that's something everybody in the organization understands pretty well. And suddenly it was a tangible thing in a way that I'm not sure AI is yet. But the flip side of that coin is that back in the days when people were trying to wrap their heads around social media, there was lots of resistance to exploration and sort of poo-pooing of it as this flash in the pan thing that was never going to make much of a difference. And I think one of the key differences between that scenario and the way people are approaching AI now is that people know it's coming. They know it's going to be important. They're trying to understand how it may impact their operations and the results they may be able to deliver. And they're getting out in front of this wave instead of ignoring it and then being surprised when it washes over them from behind.
Where are the areas that you see perhaps the most momentum building in terms of the understanding and application of it?
Generative AI is the hot thing right now, understandably so, because it provides some pretty cool functionality that we really haven't seen before. I think in terms of the real lasting impact to the way advancement shops work, generative AI is clearly going to be part of it, but I still think we shouldn't sleep on the importance of predictive analytics. Obviously, we're looking to drive engagement, we're looking to drive dollars, we're looking to drive donors, especially in a world where we can see that in the traditional participation space with annual fund giving, established practices and approaches to getting people to give on a regular basis simply aren't working as well anymore. Predictive analytics is going to be a crucial part of figuring out ways to, if not reverse that decline, stem the rate at which it is declining. When you think about AI, sometimes AI systems are what you really want to think about, and how different types of, I think marketing and marketing automation is one area in which we may see some real progress with the combination of various different types and systems, right? So you think about advanced marketing platforms that have analytical capabilities of their own, they've got automation capabilities, and then you fuse that with generative AI, and we may be able to test different approaches to content much faster and at a much lower staff cost than we have been in the past. So for instance, say you're working with a particular segment of your audience, you're trying different approaches to content, you want to figure out which ones generate better engagement in emails. The marketing automation tool and the marketing platform can help you push this out to audiences and do things like A/B testing in a way that's highly automated, so you don't need to have a lot of staff time going into actually running those tests. But as you begin to look at the results, if you fold generative AI into that scenario and produce new contents to test out new premises and then keep iterating on the same audience, you'll be able to simply test out different approaches to content at a pace and scale that would be very difficult if you're relying on human writers to do that. So I think that's a good example of how different types of AI systems and automation systems and predictive analytics can work together to let us do things that we haven't been able to do before and deliver better outcomes.
I want to jump back to something you mentioned, Andrew, about some of the traditional methods of engagement or trying to drive participation starting to not generate the same results that we've historically seen? Can you give a few examples of where you're seeing that?
Absolutely. I've been thinking a lot about participation level giving, both annual fund and annual giving scenarios. We used to get people to give to annual funds and provide unrestricted current use dollars through appeals to tradition, duty, loyalty, that whole suite of nostalgia for the alma mater, thinking that really worked tremendously well for decades, really. As our audiences have diversified, as we have more generations within our audience, and as people have grown more skeptical of institutions and have a greater desire for evidence of things like the impact of giving and some sort of a sense of how exactly dollars were spent, that old approach to making the case for annual fund giving, it just doesn't work anymore. So the next step in that, this is what we've been trying, has been to focus on what annual fund giving makes it possible for the institution to do that it couldn't do absent this pool of current use unrestricted money. And the stories we try to tell are stories of how deans are able to say yes to great ideas that come across their desk because they have this pool of money they can draw on that wasn't already allocated for something else, right? So it's like, how can the institution be more nimble, more opportunistic? How can we provide support to students when students need support? That type of approach to making the case for giving. And then we're finding that for late millennials and Gen Z, even that's not landing the way that it used to. From these audiences, based on research and what we're hearing anecdotally from donors and from volunteers, they actually very much want to know exactly where their dollars are going. And they want to know why they ought to give to Cornell if there's a cause they care about, and they could just give directly to a nonprofit that is directly associated with that cause. From an appeals and a storytelling perspective, we're trying to make the case that you can actually support that cause effectively by giving to Cornell, and that annual fund dollars support research that is going to make a difference in terms of those causes. But this is just, it's a different storytelling approach than we've done before. And this is why I think it's so important to have tools that let you try different approaches rapidly and figure out what's actually landing and what isn't. Because the only way we're ever going to figure this out is by doing experimentation and using data to inform our strategies as they develop. And we're never going to figure it out in such a way that there's a new, stable, solid ground that we can count on. We have to build this culture of experimentation and iteration and innovation into our most fundamental practices if we're going to be able to keep pace with our audiences as they evolve.
Taking those aspects of culture, you mentioned experimentation, innovation, curiosity. Has Cornell, have you with have your team taken that step further to actually build and shape job descriptions and responsibilities a certain way based on those changes you outlined and the technology that's here or on the horizon?
The answer is yes. And this is something that's been a core part of my team since I got here. Marketing and communications technology is evolving so rapidly that only people who are innately interested in what's happening and motivated to play around with it on their own and be involved in the continuous process of learning are going to be effective. So we write that into our job descriptions, and we update our job descriptions on a fairly regular basis to make sure that we note the need for professional development, that we note the need for competencies in emerging technologies that are now pretty clearly here to stay. But in our interview process, we also try pretty hard to figure out if the candidates we're talking to are people who just approach this with the right amount of fire in their belly to solve the puzzle and figure out which of these emerging things are going to help us make a difference as we work towards our various goals. One of my favorite interview questions is to simply note that the MarTech and the sort of communications technology areas have been super interesting over the past 10 years or so because a lot has changed. And I just ask people to tell me what excites you? What are you paying attention to? What do you have your eye on? And there are 100 different ways you can answer this in a way that I will find compelling. But the one thing that I'm looking for is if you've never thought about this question before, you're not going to be a good fit for our team, and you're not going to be a good fit for the role that we need you to play, because this is complicated, right? I need the whole team to be thinking about this. So we're sort of crowdsourcing responsibility for noticing trends and seeing what our audience is doing and letting each other know about it so that we can stay out in front. And that is absolutely not something that can only be driven by the people at the top of the org chart. That's something that it may even be more important to have the people in the entry level positions keep their eye on, because honestly, a lot of them are the younger folks, right? On my team, a lot of those entry level positions are Gen Z people, and they know far more about what Gen Z finds compelling right now than I ever will. But we want to create a culture where I expect them to let me know. And at the same time, when they let me know, I pay attention to it because I know that they're the people who are out there on the front lines working with people from their age group. And honestly, I think it makes it a lot more fun and more interesting as well.
So, can you give me some of the steps that you're taking to help across your team be able to learn and adapt to and leverage sort of these continuous technology advancements?
I can give you three examples that they'll sort of illustrate how we approach things, even if in isolation, they may seem fairly minor. The first of which is that every July, we have a professional development week that's unique to my team. And all we do is we say, this is the week for learning something you've been meaning to learn. Clear your calendars of everything but the most mission critical meetings in terms of keeping broader projects moving forward, and take the time to learn something that you're interested in learning about. And in the past, this has taken a variety of forms. Um, some people do courses on lynda.com. Some people buy books and read it. Some people, I realize, they're interested in the same thing as someone else on the team, and they do this together. Some people teach themselves some sort of a new package for designing infographics. But that's a commitment of staff time to continued learning, but we give people the license to figure out what the things are that they're interested in that they think will make a difference in their work. And then they do it, and then we sort of all report back about what we've learned so we can benefit from the time other people are putting on in. We also make a concerted effort to use our biweekly full team meetings as opportunities for people who are doing interesting, innovative work to show it off. And maybe it's fully baked and deployed, and maybe it's sort of a mid-flight check-in, just getting some feedback and showing people what they've been working on. That just anchors, especially for new people, that this is a thing that's really important to the team, and that we're going to give you time to show what you're doing, and the rest of the team cares about it. The final thing, and I think this is sort of a leadership function, is making sure that my leadership team and I are always open to innovative ideas, and to the extent possible, we will prioritize innovation. So that if when people have good ideas, they can come to us and say, I've been thinking about this, and they know that we're going to be receptive to that. I can't think of anything that's more depressing for people who are naturally inclined to innovate and to pay attention to emerging technologies than to come in with a good idea and have management that just isn't interested and doesn't want to hear it and thinks they understand it all already. I mean, a fundamental principle that we operate by is that the world is changing so fast and our audience is evolving so rapidly that there's no status quo. The status quo is change, right? We have to constantly be paying attention to what's going on and adjusting how we do what we do, because otherwise it's not going to land as well as we need it to land. So I think those are just examples of the culture that we've tried to set up and what that actually looks like in practice.
So, as you've just outlined nicely, internal teams across universities are still trying to understand how to learn more and what the opportunities for application are, all en route to ultimately, I think, enhancing that experience of engagement with different types of constituents. So, the other end of that is a concern that I've heard quite a bit in having conversations with different people within advancement around higher education about AI, which is how do you balance some of those great opportunities for example, efficiency while still maintaining that human connection? Can you talk to sort of that idea, that concept, and how Cornell is thinking about finding that right balance between application, but also maintaining personal human connection?
The reality is that there are some things that AI does that it can do better and faster and without getting tired than a human ever will be able to do, right? So mission critical, routine tasks that are totally amenable to automation. Flip side of the coin is there are things that AI is terrible at, and the things that AI is terrible at tend to be the things that humans excel at. So building relationships with other people, understanding nuance, understanding context, reading facial expressions and adjusting how you're approaching a conversation accordingly, right? So even the most rosy-eyed AI optimists concede that humans are simply better at a lot of the relationship building work that's at the core of advancement work. And I think that's not a reason to be depressed, but it's a reason to lean into this notion that the ideal AI enhanced workspace is one in which you're positioning the humans to do the work that they do well more, and you're positioning the machines to do the work that they do well more. And ideally, that increases your efficiency overall because the humans don't have to put all of their time and energy into these routine, tedious tasks. And the machines aren't trying to do things that they don't do well, like interact with constituents. And this just frees up more bandwidth for all of the, I guess the term would be the agents in the equation, to do what they do well and spend more time doing high value added work.
Could you color that a little bit more from your perspective, some of the specific areas of advancement where you think AI has the most opportunity for impact without compromising that personal connection and the value that humans will still bring to the work?
Sure. So when you think about the range of things that an individual giving officer could use in coming to understand a particular person in their portfolio and then doing thoughtful, effective outreach, there are lots of data sources in most advancement shops, many of which exist in different systems or different places. And for a gift officer to get ready to develop a strategy or to prep for a call, sometimes it just takes a lot of time going through the database and reading trip reports and past sort of gift agreements, just making sure they've looked at all of the things that they need to know to be able to go into a conversation uh, with a comprehensive sense of where that person has been, where they are now, and where you would like them to go. So it could be gift officer time that is spent doing that. The gift officer may have an assistant who pulls all this together in a highly manual process and then distills it and presents it to the gift officer. But that's also the type of aggregation of content work that generative AI actually does really, really well. So if you had a system that can do that quickly and at scale every time a gift officer needs it, and of course, a well-designed system would be able to continuously refresh it with the most recent content, that means the gift officer or the assistant can spend more of their time actually writing emails or on the phone with prospects or refining their strategies and less time doing all of the administrative work necessary to get to the point that they can start doing the high value add gift officer work. And then they're spending maybe 30 hours a week actually working with prospects as opposed to 20, right? And over time, and if you multiply that across an entire staff of gift officers, that is a lot more time doing the actual face-to-face work that's going to generate giving than it would if they were still having to do all of this administrative work themselves. And so multiply that over a year and then over a course of a series of years. And presumably the whole process gets more efficient and refined over time. And I think that's part of where we're going to see the real long-term ROI of the emergence of these tools, and that the people who are good at doing the face-to-face work will have more time to do it.
Yeah, perfect illustration. Thank you. And as more teams look at how to use this technology, there are going to be barriers, of course, to learning, to adoption, to being able to afford maybe certain technologies. Um, what are, in your opinion, some of the key ones that advancement divisions are going to have to tackle?
So I think there are some concerns that are broadly applicable to figuring out AI and AI tools in general. And then there's another level that may be more institutionally specific. So let me tackle the first one, the more general concerns. It's reasonably well known that a challenge with generative AI is that oftentimes it's not as accurate as you would hope it would be, right? So a challenge is that even if you begin to incorporate generative AI into your workflows, if you don't have your teams educated to the fact that they actually do need to be sort of the final validator of whatever the system outputs before they use this in a business context, you could get yourself into all sorts of trouble by using information that isn't accurate or just doesn't provide the level of quality control and professionalism that you expect. Now, you could go down a road of being highly prescriptive about this and saying you can only use this particular tool and you have to have it checked by 2 people before you put it in writing and send it off to a prospect. But I think you could drive yourself crazy doing that simply because all the tools are evolving so fast that as soon as you hit save on a policy document, it's going to be out of date. As we've been working on policies for staff, and this applies, I was on a project that did this for Cornell communicators, in addition to working on one for our alumni affairs and development staff. We realized that the solution is actually to refer back to a lot of core principles and expectations that existed before the advent of AI, such as you are responsible for your work. Just like you were responsible for making sure everything was spelled correctly in the days before widespread spell check, you are responsible for making sure that something you're going to put in front of an audience is a professional product that you're comfortable with, whether it was generated by AI or not. So I think that speaks to the broader issue. When you get down to the cultural issues of organizational readiness for using AI tools, I think that's going to vary a lot from institution to institution and probably within organizations from team to team. Some teams and some individual teams, and I'm not talking Cornell here, I'm talking more abstractly, are simply more freaked out by the advent of AI than others. I know that writers on my team who have gone to conferences that are for communicators that have a lot of writers come back and they say that pretty much every session degenerates into what does generative AI mean for people who are professional writers. My team tries very hard to make sure that we're out in front of this type of anxiety and thinking proactively about how emerging tools, AI or non, can actually help us be more efficient and produce better outcomes. I do remember there was one funny episode where I had a writer who was, she had a fairly Luddite approach to life and was very skeptical of AI until she realized that there were companies out there who were prepared to pay her money to help train their models. And all of a sudden she flipped on a dime, and suddenly she was a big proponent of using AI to enhance writing once she realized that was a side gig opportunity. And I thought that was kind of funny. But it's reasonable that some people are going to be less open to these tools that are disrupting the way they do work that they care about than others. And I think it's on leadership to figure out ways to introduce some of these new capabilities in ways that make it very clear that nobody is thinking about cutting jobs. Nobody's getting replaced by AI. What we're looking for is ways that we can use AI to enhance what our dedicated and productive staff are doing in such a way that we're more efficient and we deliver better outcomes. And that's absolutely possible as long as leadership A, believes that, and B, understands some of these macro level dynamics enough to be able to tee this up and say it proactively instead of reactively once all of your staff has gotten themselves into a panic because they haven't been getting any guidance about this. I think our VP, Fred Vansickle, has been great on this. We've acted on that. We've actually established divisional leads for thinking about AI. So that's a two-headed approach. I'm the division's AI application lead, and my partner, Debbie Kraszewski-Werner, is our AI technology lead, because you need somebody who understands the business problems and you need someone who really understands the technology. And when you have those two perspectives working together, that's going to best position you to figure out how you do the high ROI stuff within the context of the tools you actually have available to you. You need to get out in front of it, and you need to be honest about the opportunities. You need to be honest about some of the challenges. You need to be honest about what you're doing to try things out and to put educational programs in place so that people know that you're going to commit to educating them about these emerging technologies. And it takes time, but I think the long-term cost of not doing this is going to be almost impossible to estimate. I've seen some business writing suggesting that AI is not going to make certain jobs or functions obsolete, but people in those jobs or functions who can use AI to do it better are going to have an insurmountable advantage over people who do not, or organizations that do not. And I think that's really very much accurate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Andrew, I'll move along and talk about something that's pretty interesting. I'm aware that Cornell has, I think it literally is called an AI sandbox or innovation sandbox. Could you talk a little bit about what that is and how your team perhaps has taken advantage of the opportunity to experiment in that environment?
Sure. So one of the challenges with universities playing around with AI, and advancement shops especially, is concerns about data security, right? It's pretty well known that if you're using the free version of one of the big LLMs that's out there, that whatever you put into the LLM may go back to the company that built the LLM and be used for training future models, so on and so forth. Obviously, if you're dealing with sensitive data, especially when you get into things like donor data and giving history and all that sort of thing, very much not stuff that you want out there in environments that you're not pretty confident are secure. So our sandbox is simply a resource that's built by our information technologies group, hosted on Cornell servers, and it provides access to several of the big LLMs, including ChatGPT, Claude, and then I think we've also got some of the Meta LLMs and Cohere, in an environment that is secure, that keeps all of our data on our servers. There's also an Azure data analyzer tool that's in there, which I've been having all sorts of fun with. And the great thing about this is that when you're in a secure environment where you can use actual data, that's when you can begin to pressure test several ideas for how you might be able to use these tools in reality. And you can't do that if you're using hypothetical data, because if it's real data that you already know pretty well, you can tell if the responses that come back feel like they're plausible or if they aren't. An example of this is that I recently did an analysis of a survey of donors that lapsed in FY24. And it wasn't a super complicated survey, but it was asking specific donors which of these variables influenced your giving decisions in FY24. And if you answered in specific ways, then there were sort of free-form response fields where people could provide us with additional detail. I would never have put that out there into an LLM where the data wasn't secure. But given that we had the sandbox, I was able to spend enough time to figure out how to write prompts that would get me the responses that I needed. And it was tremendously fun. I spent a lot of time doing qualitative research when I was in graduate school, and have spent a lot of time hand coding survey responses and manually going through and tagging them with particular topics. And I estimate that what took me about 20 hours probably would have taken, 100 to 120 hours that I've been doing it manually. And part of that 20 hours was simply spent getting familiar enough with the system that I could get it to give me what I wanted. So I think that's going to be a real game changer for me. It may enable us to make audience research a much more regular practice as we go through our engagement cycle, because we don't have to have an analyst on staff who does nothing but this, or we don't have to spend $5,000 to have a vendor do it for us. We can just do it ourselves and then use AI to do the analysis. So the sandbox is one great example of something that really enables innovation. There's something else that's going on, once again coordinated by our IT group, that I think is also really, really smart and really effective. So the same group that came up with the sandbox has put together what they're calling an AI innovation lab. What they do here is they are looking for business use cases throughout the university that AI could be applied to solve. And back in the fall, they had something like 14 projects. The spring cohort has around 20. And what they do is they pair up a project team from the sponsoring department with students who are working on AI. And what they try to do is they try to spend a semester building a prototype that addresses the business problem. And they just did a presentation last month of the 14 projects from the fall, and it was totally fascinating because you had some that were coming out of the finance office, some coming out of the budget office, but then others were coming out of academic services, sort of summarizing a big history of notes and academic data for academic advisors so that they can go into meetings with students with this recent snapshot of how the students been doing and what they seem to be interested in. They had a few that were from faculty who were trying to figure out ways to do sort of pulse checks of an entire class to figure out how much they understood from the prior class before going into the next class, so they could shape their lesson plan for that day to address the things that people were confused about and spend less time on things they weren't confused about. But it's actually seeing some of these concepts be put into practice that's really, really interesting and inspirational for me. And we've got an AAD project in the spring 2025 cohort that we had the kickoff meeting on Tuesday actually, and we're pretty psyched about it and trying to refine it. And it's sort of a prospect identification idea, seeing what happens if we use generative AI to go out and not only kind of smush together institutional data, but also take a look out there on the internet to surface things that we may not know and see if that can enhance our ability to understand prospects that we don't know very, very well personally yet. So it's exciting, and we're really excited to find out what it outputs, and then once we understand that better, how we can apply that to particular use cases within the division.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. Those are two great examples of a university that is leaning into experimentation. And I'm curious to hear from your perspective. What do you see as the tipping point for a lot of universities to move toward real long-term investment? Is it the security of the data use environment? Is it risk tolerance? Is it clear and demonstrable ROI, or something else, or a combination?
So I think it's going to be a combination of the ROI question becoming clear enough that it overrides people's risk aversion. So like if the juice is enough worth the squeeze, people may decide that they're willing to assume some of the inherent risks that are associated with the deployment of AI. And I think that will come either in the form of dollars or donors or efficiencies that over time make it possible to sort of reallocate FTEs from one function to another. The people who are doing the high value work that only people can do can spend more time doing that, and the machines do an increasing amount of the highly routine and essential but tough for a human to do work.
I want to move into giving the audience some concrete takeaways. What advice would you have to offer advancement leaders looking to integrate AI into their teams effectively?
I guess the first thing I'd say is that you are never going to understand this stuff if you don't use it. You can read an infinite amount of coverage in the business press about the potential impact of AI, but until you actually roll up your sleeves and try it yourself, you're going to have a hard time leading in this world that we're moving into. So that would be my first one. Budget the time to get your hands dirty and find out what this stuff feels like. You need to give your staff permission to play around with this, because if you don't give your staff permission, and if they have to do this on the DL, all that's going to happen is they're going to experiment, but they're not going to tell you what they're doing, because they will do it on their own. That's a dynamic that we've seen over and over again. You try to lock down devices, people bring their own devices and they just don't tell you that they're using those devices. If you try to say, don't don't use social media, they'll do it, but they won't tell you about it. So you're far better off being transparent about this. And that has two real virtues. One is that you can actually educate people about risks that will help them keep themselves and you out of trouble. I think data security is the best example of that. Secondly, this stuff is really complicated and figuring it out can be time consuming. If everybody's trying to figure it out in isolation, that's going to slow the pace at which you can evolve organizationally dramatically. But if you give everybody permission to try things out that are relevant to their particular area of responsibility, and if you create a culture where you not only give people permission to talk about what they're doing and share that with others, but you sort of provide an expectation that people will share what they're doing with each others, people are going to begin to realize that they're working on similar use cases and they can share what they're doing with others, and it will just accelerate the whole process of figuring out not only how AI can help with advancement, but how it will help with your organization in particular. A great example of this, so we've got a Teams team that is now dedicated to the conversation on AI in our division. And one of the people on the Alumni Affairs leadership team had the fabulous idea that there be a channel that's devoted to nothing but productivity hacks. So the notion is, if you come up with a way to do something more efficiently, that would be where you go and you tell people what you did. That's where you can go and you can share prompts. And if we have a little library that's right there within the team, um, where we're collating all of the stuff that increases efficiency, that makes it really easy for the people who only care about increasing their efficiency to just pop on in and find the stuff they're looking for right away. Whereas the people who are more interested in the conceptual evolution of AI and so on and so forth, there are other channels that are available for that. But giving people permission to play around, convening a conversation about it, and expecting people to participate in that conversation, I think is a core element of what leadership needs to look like in this world that we're living in.
Okay. And you hit on collaboration, which of course pays dividends in so many different areas of our work. From your experience with some of the initiatives, sitting on a task force to look at AI for communicators and the innovation sandbox and so forth, can you speak to how advancement teams should be thinking about approaching collaboration with campus partners that are integral to artificial intelligence adoption, whether it's IT or HR or other groups? What have you encountered in your experience at Cornell?
So I think just the reality of how this technology is being rolled out is that the institutions that thrive are going to be the ones that have really strong top level university leadership, as well as IT leadership to provide tools that it would be awfully hard for a particular division or department to provide on their own. I mean, a lot of this stuff is shockingly expensive. Um, Even if my division had wanted to stand up a sandbox, we don't know how to do that. We needed somebody who knows how to do that to do it. Um, and I think that heading off in a direction that runs contrary to what the institution as a whole might be doing is just it's a waste of time and money, and it's going to make everybody frustrated. So I think you need to ideally depend on the central resources that are being provided to you. You need to recognize that this is an area in which misalignment with university direction is going to be counterproductive and might actually get you into trouble. But that said, if you have a good positive relationship with the people who are leading the charge centrally, you can actually make a good case when your needs may not align with some of the things that they're thinking about. So I can give you a very tangible example of that. When we were working on the guidelines for the use of AI by communicators, one of the things that the sort of, I don't want to say traditional communicators, but the people who do the sort of conventional central communications function, where they're worried about telling the institutional story and they're worried about risk management and PR, they were very clear that they think that you shouldn't be using AI to produce images that could be construed as reality that aren't reflective of reality as it happens on campus, right? So initially in that process, there was a sort of blanket prohibition against using AI to generate images of campus that could potentially mislead. And what I added to the story was that actually, if you're sitting in advancement and what you're trying to do is you're trying to persuade people to make gifts that might result in significant changes to campus, we have a long history of using artists to draw renderings of what a building might look like in a hypothetical situation on campus, right? AI might enable us to do that in a much more realistic fashion. It might make it look better. It might be faster. It might be cheaper. It might position us to iterate on what that building might look like at different funding levels. I sort of sketched out a hypothetical scenario where you had a tool that was flexible enough that you could literally sit down with somebody thinking about giving a building and say, okay, so for $5 million, the lobby could look like this. And for 10 million, it could look like this. And for 20, your name could be up there in neon lights, and actually make all these changes on the fly and have the image change accordingly. That's something you could never do with an artist drawing all these things by hand. But that's a use case that is deeply, deeply relevant to advancement work that there's no reason to expect somebody who's sitting in media relations or public relations to think about, right? Because they don't think about the future in that way. That's not what they're trying to illustrate. And once I made the point, everyone was like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And so we adjusted that particular guideline accordingly. But it's really important for advancement folks to be collaborating with people who are involved in these central policy setting and guideline setting efforts to make sure that the unique aspects of advancement work are represented and taken into account when these policies are being developed.
Well, Andrew, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you. As a practitioner and a school that's sort of ahead of the adoption curve here, I think you've illustrated what a lot of advancement teams and universities are going to have to explore in 2025, and how AI is reshaping or can reshape the way that they work in significant ways. Thank you so much for joining today. Your insights into AI and how that's impacting advancement teams, specifically at Cornell, but the opportunity for others to learn from that is significantly valuable to the conversation that institutions are having. For those tuning in, be sure to check out our next episode where we'll explore high-impact AI applications for fundraising and donor engagement with Adam Martell from Givesy. If you're enjoying the series, don't forget to follow Advancement Amplified AI for IA for more insights on AI's evolving role in higher education advancement. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
This Pulse Check mini-series has been brought to you by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.